Hi.
We may have the big hairy American stopping in, Ken in Glasgow.
I hope Ken comes because
Maybe,
he's good.
yes, indeed. It's a little late for him up there
Hmm.
in Glasgow. A little late for us over on this side of the pond.
Correct.
Then we're going to let us cook our salad, kitchen ASMR with yours truly here on the versatile and joy of cooking your salad.
I hope John's
We'll
here to
have
help us cooking the
mhm.
salads.
Professor Ann's going to talk about the neo-colonial cobalt mining going on.
Aye.
Professor John will be discussing another home insurance company that's bailing out of Florida,
Deal.
closing up shop. On Shop ASMR, the Stanley number 80 cabinet scraper workout featuring Pennsylvania cherry wood with Dave in Pennsylvania. And Annika will be talking about correcting the misinformation about socialism and Marxism and communism.
Oh, so she
And
got
we'll,
good.
yeah,
Then
she'll
got
be popping
Rush.
on later. And then Rush will be maybe trying to ring into heaven.
Well, the other Rush is not available, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Hang on. Yeah. So I see first on the agenda is me.
Indeed.
Hello, me. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Autonomous Collective. Just myself. A bit rushed because for the rest of the world, in nearly said it, the Autonomous Collective world, they're all in America, nearly all of them. So for me, it's midnight here. For them, it's not. And I needed to get sleep to do this. Right. So Ken isn't here, obviously. But if he does come down, Ken, if you don't know him, if you've never met him, and you probably haven't if you've never met us, he is a lovely man with a big beard, and he's an American living in Glasgow, and he sings in a
In
is
a
it a
broom
closet?
closet.
It's a closet sort of wardrobe. Anyhow, it's where his clothes are. So that'll be fun. He sings not just show tunes, show tunes. That's his thing. He knows show tunes, and he's great
Show
at it.
tunes in the closet.
Yes.
And he has a Twitch channel, so he
Yeah.
streams on Twitch occasionally under
Yes.
the Big Hairy American show.
But we're only
Yeah.
allowed to advertise that Twitch channel if he turns up and just puts a shift in, frankly. Because otherwise, you can sort off. I'm not going to advertise that thing. I'm joking. I'm kind of love you, but I don't even know what the website is. I'm going to have to plug. See, this is how late I am. Ad hoc this isn't. Wow, like 90s TV.
So slapdash.
Then we've got Prof and talking about cobalt, not the color, the mining. Prof John, Insurance Florida, Shop ASMR DPA, and Annika. What would you call that? I'd say a socialism. Not correction. Socialism understanding. And then Russian mover. Cool. Right. I've written all that down. Let's rock. Oh, he's Prof John. Can somebody in the audience in the Zoom chat be responsible for pressing the buttons and letting people in, please? Thank you. Over to you, Ken, who isn't here yet. Let's have a look. I shall check the chat. No Ken. No Ken do. An unusual Ken as well. He's got two N's in his name. Right. Seeing as he's not here, we'll go straight to you, Joseph, because you don't.
That is true. Ken doesn't normally have. Well, Kenneth has two N's, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's got two N's in Ken. Yeah. And where he lives, as he may bring up himself, he's found this out after living in Glasgow. Ken is a word, it's not just a name in Glasgow. It means care. A bit like kin, but it's not. So you're going to do the probably what I would consider Satan's work. And cooked lettuce.
There's something so wonderful about cooking your salad. It transforms this fairly bitter roughage into a juicy, tender, succulent, dreamy
Ooh,
treat.
this sounds an
Very,
awful
very
lot.
special.
It sounds an awful lot like a bit of a Joe from Norway oversell. So the test will be in eating, Joe. Seeing as
This
you're cooking a salad,
will not be as
yeah,
won't be as challenging as the bitter gourd.
yeah. So you're going to cook a salad. Are you going to have the croutons raw? You know, the raw dough, little cubes of dough.
So what
Straight
I'm going to
in.
do, I'll do it to what we were discussing last week. Someone mentioned grilling romaine or grilling salad, and it is really super simple to cut the greens in half, maybe drench them in a little water, salt and pepper them, and then throw them on the grill for 1 to 2 minutes, both sides. Drizzle with olive oil or dressing, balsamic reduction, what have you. Super simple. I don't have a grill in the house, so what I'm going to do is dry roast it in the pan for one way, and then the second way I'm going to do it is I'm going to take the outer leaves and I'm just going to chop those up and then do a quick saute with them. With, I don't know, maybe I'll add a couple other ingredients because this only takes 2 minutes to cook. So maybe I'll make a little pesto or something.
Oh,
Maybe saute with some garlic or
I see you
green
replacing
onion, maybe
you're
some
replacing,
dill. We'll see.
you're
Lots
replacing
of
pine nuts
lemon.
with cashew nuts. See, is that?
Yeah, the pine nuts are a little pricey up here.
Yes, quite expensive. Very
Yeah.
silly.
So I'll commence to cooking and then we'll bring in Professor Anne.
Approximately, how long do you reckon it's going to take you to do your cooking there, Joe? So I can
I
jump
think,
in and out and say hello or say you're
yeah,
burping for the full belly of
yeah.
salad.
It'll take me all of 4 minutes to cook this, but it'll
Yes.
probably take me around 20 minutes or so with all the prep.
Ah, well, that's good.
Yeah.
You can
And
waste a bit
then,
of time chopping up vegetables like you're going to cook
yeah,
vegetables.
this will be the quickest ASMR.
Brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Cool.
So we're going to go straight to Anne Lee.
Let's bring Anne in.
Are you there, Anne Lee? How was your internet connection this fine evening?
Seems to be fine.
Beautiful.
We'll see. We'll see.
It's
It's
got to
as
be.
good as it'll be as good as it can be until it drops.
Fingers crossed. When you're discussing the troubles of cobalt mining, we won't be interrupted by a singing American in Glasgow. Just open. Like that'll be. If he comes in singing, we'll have to tell him to shut up.
Indeed.
This is serious. Yes. So it is troubling. Cobalt mining. Let's rock, Annalie. Spill the beans.
Yeah. I put up a thing in Daily Kos. I put the link in the chat if someone wants to share the image. That's fine. It's not necessary. I think it's just become more interesting that there are all these resource crises, and we're not fully aware of them. You know that so much methane is being now. There's new information about how much methane is being released in oil drilling operations and a whole variety of other things that seem especially more critical now that we have more extreme weather. But this cobalt story came up during Democracy Today just this week. It's an interview largely with an author whose book came out in January, and it's about cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I think it's Congo Kinshasa, and it's just interesting. Siddharth Kara. He's an expert on modern day slavery and the author of Cobalt Red: How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives. And it's they do a long form interview, and he describes the problems of mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Those who don't know what it is goes back to being the former Zaire or the former Belgian Congo. It's a country in the middle of Africa, twice the size of Texas, and borders all kinds of other African countries. It is a big player in the copper industry. Copper is the primary resource that is extracted from there. But the cobalt has come up because it's an easy thing to mine relative to certain types of scale. So, for example, they have very big. It's a normal mining operation in the sense they're just digging it out of the ground and refining it. On the other hand, there's an entire sub-market of people who spend their days with their children scooping up from the dirt because cobalt sits fairly close to the surface, picking up essentially scrap cobalt. Now, the problem, of course, is to call it artisanal, because we normally, in the Western context, artisanal refers to a kind of craft operation, whereas what this is poor folks manually picking stuff out of the ground, and that's hardly artisanal in my mind. But
we would call it rustic.
Yes, rustic would be even a better characterization of it.
Yes.
The issue with cobalt is that this is where 60% or so of the world's cobalt comes from. Cobalt is a heavy metal, and it's used in things ranging from cell phones to electric vehicle batteries, and it's a very key element. Now, the point I want to make that is very important is that on the one hand, you have an emotional appeal because this is a country that suffers from the resource curse. That is, it's an asymmetric relation between what gets extracted and what comes back to a country. The ideal of what perhaps is trade, the idea of trade is that short of comparative advantage, people get kind of the equal value for things that get taken out. This is the hope of kind of a more a more democratic trade after colonialism and imperialism. But in fact, it's been argued that there is a kind of neocolonialism because certain very large countries that require such resources for their own industries, manufacturing, are getting more and not giving back enough. And the key villain in this particular piece is People's Republic of China, who are present in about 39 African countries. And this is after the Cultural Revolution. China decided to reinvigorate its relationship with the world, and particularly for resources that it's more difficult to get. And in the case of manufacturing electronics, things like cobalt are really necessary. And we've also, you know about lithium, et cetera. The variety of countries that have more of it than others. Cobalt and lithium are available in the United States, but not quite in the same numbers. And China is taking a larger advantage in its quote unquote partnership with Congo. Now, it seems fair. They offer good terms. The money is fairly good. The problem that comes from this particular process is this artisanal side. In other words, you have large companies, major companies, some located, whose headquarters are located not simply in China, but in a variety of other countries. And of course, you can imagine how tortured the relationships among which corporation is which doing what. But at the very base level, and that's what this book is about talking about everyday life. People who have their families and fair number of kids, and everybody in the family goes down and not unlike South Africa, are picking cobalt out of the ground near where these mines are. And lest you think that this is, a small aspect of it, it literally is the only source of income for some folks. they're making maybe $1 a day or less collecting, a toxic material, and of course suffering from that sort of the side element of what handling things like cobalt are. Needless to say, the benefits are not trickling down, as it were. The thing is that the same companies that own the large cobalt mines also operate a subcontracting economy where you have little shops like pawn shops that buy this what they call artisanal cobalt. And so you have these like little stores where people will, collect a bag of cobalt and bring it in and get money for it. Now, the problem, of course, is it's a whole health thing. Nobody, they're just sticking it in a bag and dragging it in and getting their money. And these companies, these small subcontracted companies, still sell the same cobalt that is being extracted by large scale mines. Is, they throw in this sort of hand gathered stuff in with a whole bunch, and there's really no difference. There's no refining difference. So the problem, of course, in an economy is that rather than do things like public works or improve the economy or do the normal things that come with development, they allow this informal economy or sub-economy to exist and sort of remain in its kind of oppressed state where people are just barely making it, and everyone's health is being impaired. Now, the history of the Democratic Republic of the Congo is fairly complex and includes all the usual kind of ugliness, coups being attempted, some assassinations, and a whole variety of other things in the post-colonial era. But it has all the earmarks of a developing country. It still has incredible problems. Let's see, the one figure that stands out is 400,000 women were raped in a year. That's that kind of thing, and that's a kind of annual rate, just to give you a sense of how chaotic the situation might be. It did have some insurgencies. I think the eastern side of Congo had an insurgency. It's a complex economy nonetheless, and has all the other earmarks of a developing economy. But as this book tries to point out, you have major technologies extracting resources like copper and cobalt, but they turn a kind of blind eye to this kind of human toll, and they claim that the supply chain is free from abuse, especially widespread child labor, which is, obviously fostered by an informal market. So that's that's the hook for this particular book, which is a new book and describes a kind of public health catastrophe, and that there is a human rights violation on top of environmental destruction. So it has all of those kinds of things. You can imagine also that there are other issues relative to the extraction of minerals that, water supplies and all kinds of other things that are just polluted and screwed up and as part of this process. Now, when you try to look at this slightly more objectively, the resource curse is problematic and exists in a variety of places and countries, particularly, for example, lithium, which in South America has lithium issues, for example, but those same lithium issues exist in the United States and, for example, Nevada. So these aren't that unusual relative to what gets extracted and whether any of the benefits cycle back to the economy. Needless to say, this resembles the same problems that Angola has with both oil and diamonds. And the Democratic Republic of Congo with its own kind of diamond issue, and noting that there are conflict diamonds that are part of this kind of incredible history. So the critique is not only of the situation in general in Africa, but also that China is taking advantage of it. They offer infrastructure because they're very heavy into building things like roads and stuff, which is really incredibly important for development. On the other hand, it doesn't quite become equitable, but you can also imagine there's a lot of corruption that screws this all up. So the story has this complexity. The critique of Mr. Kara's Cobalt Red Book is that he tends to focus too much on the kind of emotive elements of the story of children that are, being used to collect these kind of fairly easily accessible cobalt that is worth a fair amount of money, but not getting a whole bunch of. Now, the other side of this, of course, is that there's an entire apparatus that attempts to say, well, no, we're trying to do the right thing. And even Tesla is part of a consortium that says, well, we're engaging in fair practices, blah, blah, blah. And, this is exactly the same issue that we have with other commodities like coffee, whether there really is a free trade coffee, which we can at least see as consumers, as a regular consumer, you don't see this because the cobalt is sunken somewhere into your phone, or if you want an electric vehicle, into your battery. So this is an important element. And what I'll close with in this little presentation is there is a kind of, background malevolent agency. That is, you have people who claim that they're doing the right thing in terms of this economy, when in fact there are these particular kinds of contradiction. The other reality, of course, at a policy level and not at a market level, is that there are substitutes for using cobalt in the production of batteries. And of course, this is that issue that there are always, other ways of doing things. Sometimes it costs a little bit more, but some other people, because they want to make a profit, are willing to use the more dangerous material to produce their profit. Now, scientifically speaking, there is a material called lithium iron phosphate, and that there's a cobalt-free battery pack that can be produced, and they have been produced for certain, for example, Tesla models, the Tesla Model 3. Tesla has outlined for the past couple of years their plans to make cobalt-free battery cells, but I don't think they've moved quite forward with it yet. So this is this question of making enough profit at the front end and creating these other harms at the back end. So this is this question of whether countries or international agreements are engaged in the issue of a proper ethical and moral industrial policy, which obviously has a lot of moving parts, but it does seem to me that people need to be more aware. And I'm grateful that democracy now has made us more aware of this kind of issue. And it's not simply about child labor and environmental health, but ultimately it is about the planet. It ultimately gets down to that planet thing again. Where we need to find substitutable resources, alternative economies, and really care about what's happening to people at the very ground level. So that's my little report on these matters.
That was phenomenal. I've got a question, but Joe's had his hand up for a number of minutes.
I've got a question as well. Has this been going on since the colonial era? And if so, has these people's lives, material conditions changed much? This basically a continuation of that.
One could say that, and one of our friends, Mr. Feldo, did a long presentation for us on Belgian colonialism, but things like rubber were the prior resource extraction from the Congo. And needless to say, under Belgian colonialism, people were abused in horrible ways, in a variety of horrible ways. And the royalty in Belgium got very rich from this, needless to say, also. But cobalt extraction has only been happening in the second half of the 20th century. The liberation of Congo occurred somewhere in the 1960s. And so through a series of, strongman dictators, the economy grew, but it also got colonized, and in all of the same kind of ways that we've seen in other colonized places. And it's pretty important, considering that the Congo is the second largest country on the continent of Africa, and it is the 11th largest country in the world in land area. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and we don't really hear about it that much. And that American mainstream media doesn't talk about Africa very much unless it has to. And so this is, these are the kind of things that we just need to know more about. But as I said, copper is the #1 industry. So cobalt doesn't even, reach a kind of front page sort of issue relative to mineral extraction. And the copper industry, of course, is incredibly problematic in a global way. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yes. Thanks. Regarding the food, I'm all done with my prep, basically. So we're all ready to cook.
You briefly explain what you've done very quickly.
So I've chopped up some basil and mashed some garlic and cashew nuts. Drizzled olive oil in there, made a little pesto, which we're gonna put on the side of the grilled or the dry roasted romaine. So I'm gonna dry roast this in the wok, and then I'm gonna saute this one in garlic and green onions, and maybe throw in some dill and verjuice. I'm all out of lemons, so I have a Middle Ages, probably older than that. It's basically, it's not vinegar and it's not wine. It's what they've been cooking throughout the ages with when you need an acidic punch. So it's basically raw grape juice.
Well, I know just to say when you've got grape juice, mate, grape beer, that doesn't work. You should have had lemons. And Lee used to, well, of course you're still there. I can hear your hearty laughter. How recyclable, hard to say, is cobalt? And are there, so I saw earlier in the week there's plans to start searching the deep sea for metal extraction and mineral extraction. Do you know if there's any sort of future in finding it down under the sea?
Yes, I think it's really important, but the problem, as with all mineral extraction, is to look at it from the recyclable side, it may actually be more expensive to recycle the raw elements than to get new elements, and that's been the problem with certain types of materials. The joke we had running amongst us was of course the stealing of catalytic converters from cars, because the rhodium from it is recyclable, but it requires a lot of chemical processes to recycle it, but it is worth it at $30,000 an ounce. Cobalt doesn't quite have that same kind of value. I think that there are probably, and this is a kind of faith in science, that there are ways to recycle a lot of these materials. The only ones that seem more valuable at the present moment, of course, are gold from the circuits of cell phones and things like that. And we don't still have a good system of doing that recycling. So we're still in, we're still at an early point in some of this, but as I said, it comes back to what I was talking about before, whether we have a kind of industrial policy that's really necessary when you have these complex supply chains.
Marvelous.
Before I turn off my mic, I'll just say this one, the romaine heart, we're just gonna throw on a dry roasting pan. So it's called dry roasting.
Heretic.
So we'll put it for a little bit. This will basically give it a little char so that you get that smoky flavor to it.
Smoky lettuce.
And then when I switch it over, I'll put a lid on it to steam it the rest of the way. Once we get a nice little, you can see the char already developing.
Yeah, it's just not something that you think of doing, is it? I can imagine a bit of a blanch. A bit of a blanch, dip it into some hot water, put the char.
The char will give you it'll boost the flavor.
Yes,
profile.
well, it does, doesn't it? I like things burnt, like toast. What? Anyhow, uh,
There's a fine line between burnt and charred, or toasted. Toasted
yes.
and
Would you mind, Anley, if we were joined in this insane restaurant by Professor John? I hope he's there and available.
Come on down. John.
Professor John, are you there? Professor John,
I am here. I am here,
Bitch,
Lane.
there.
I have appeared.
Hello, John.
Hello.
How are you this evening, young man?
Very well, thank you.
Very good, very good. I hear you're going to discuss some Florida insurance doings.
Yeah, well, I kind of related to what Professor Ann Lee was talking about. It has to do with environmental degradation and attempting to come up with cleaner energy sources. So I wanted to list a few things that are happening with regard to the environment. One thing to be looking for is the weekend heat forecast in the United States on Friday is predicting that Death Valley, California will reach an all-time high in terms of temperature of 131 degrees Fahrenheit.
I would implode in such conditions.
Yeah, there's a reason it's called Death Valley.
Yes.
So, we probably don't want to make the rest of the planet like Death Valley in terms of
Yes.
temperature. But that seems to be where we're heading. With the lack of coordinated efforts that are needed to deal with this pending catastrophe.
And of course, Africa and Europe is being swept by, what's it called? It's got a satanic name, this heat wave. Not succubus, it's similar.
in Spain, it's called a Tyrol wind.
Something like
So
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to be happening everywhere, John. I wonder if it's a coincidence.
I wish it were. So a little bit of interesting news from Florida, where America keeps most of its crazy.
Are you listening, Forrest?
He's an exception, I would say. Farmers Insurance, which is a large American insurance company, has announced that it will be quitting the Florida market for issuing property, auto, and umbrella policies in that state. So this will immediately affect about 100,000 policyholders in the state of Florida. It announced this Tuesday, and it said it would stop covering property in Florida, a business decision the company said was taken to, quote, effectively manage risk exposure, unquote, amid an increasingly frequent extreme weather disaster scenarios fueled by human-caused global heating. Farmers informed Florida officials that it would no longer write new home, auto, or umbrella policies in the state, making the company the fourth insurance giant to quit the Florida market over the past year. So just in the last year, Florida homeowners and other residents have lost 4 different companies that provided insurance to that state. Some of the companies,
maybe health insurance can quit and they can get free healthcare off the government. Because I know that's what DeSantis will be all about.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think he's adopted the traditional Republican healthcare plan, which is to not get sick, and if you do, die quickly.
Yeah, fuck you. That's their health plan.
Yeah, that is their official. I think that's in their platform, if I'm not mistaken.
That's it. When they get in front on the podium flags behind them. Here's our official position on health. Fuck you. Bye. God save America.
Yeah, I mean, it's quick and to the point, you know.
It is.
Yeah.
Oh,
The healthcare plan is to not get sick, and if you do, die early.
yes. Don't try to make a noise when you're dying. Just keep it quiet.
Yeah, please be quiet. Yeah, don't be rude. Don't be rude.
Don't be rude.
Some of the insurance companies that have quit Florida have cited rising risks from hurricanes as their main reason for leaving. And a study published earlier this year showed that rapid sea level rise in the southern US, which is happening faster than scientists previously understood, is intensifying hurricane damage in coastal cities. And there are many coastal cities with a lot of expensive property in Florida. It's going to become increasingly less expensive, I think.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it a bargain.
So these are acts of God and insurance are fans of acts of God. You'd think they'd be sticking around in Florida, all those God-fearing folk down there.
Mm.
You'd think they'd be, sticking in and getting a bit of cash.
Yeah, I mean, they could pray a little harder and see if that helps.
Yes.
Good luck to them. The administration of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's running for the Republican presidential nomination for president, said in May that he rejects the politicization. So politicalization.
It is a hard word. It is a hard word.
Politicization.
That's what it is. Politicization of the weather, and that the GOP-controlled state legislature worked hard, but ultimately failed to convince farmers to keep doing business in the state. So they tried to keep the company there, but whatever they offered wasn't enough. Let's see. And really, the insurance market in Florida has struggled since Hurricane Andrew destroyed a large area of southeastern Florida in 1992, and storms have been getting, more frequent, and more intense. So this is a real problem. But what I want to point out is that this is not just a problem for Florida. This is going to be a problem for more and more places around the country and around the world, where insurance companies are going to be either taking themselves out of markets, just not offering anything, or they're going to be continuing to increase premiums at a faster and faster pace, so that very few people are going to be able to afford those premiums in order to protect themselves from more and more extreme weather. So one way or the other, fewer people are going to be covered or have their property covered by insurance. And for most people, their home is their biggest asset. So this is a major issue.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have to see how the government reacts. But, if we keep heading in this direction, there's only so much that the government can do to protect people's property that is in coastal areas, or areas that are subject to other hazards such as wildfires, as we saw in California, as we're seeing in Canada. It's getting dire. And
well, I'd like to think this sort of thing this sort of scenario could force a sort of national insurance, as well as health as well, obviously. But do you think that's going to happen? That's the states, they're not in for the nationalization of anything, are they really?
not recently.
Mm.
Even
if it did happen, it would be sad to make global collapse force their hand to doing something good for the people. But
I think they are going to try at some point, but it may be too late. Bill McKibben's recently said that he thinks we are on right about to reach the point of no return in terms of self-reinforcing effects of climate change. Once this ball starts rolling downhill, it's becomes nearly impossible to stop it. So,
Speaking of char,
yes,
we're all going to be a little bit like this romaine salad here, burnt to a crisp.
burnt
It
to a
does look
crisp
nice, though.
and
Still a
wilted.
little juicy. So
It looks delicious.
nice. So you can see you get a little bit of char on the edge. So after a couple minutes, it'll basically char on a dry pan on the outside and then steam the rest of the greens. And then I added some balsamic reduction and a little pesto.
Right,
Super juicy. Super juicy.
What is the drizzle there? Is that a reduction of
It's,
balsamic vinegar?
Yes, yes. You
Very
can
nice.
use any kind of acidic will work, or dressing. And then this one is just simple chopped up salad, chopped up lettuce with some garlic and green onions and olive oil and dill. And then the verjuice. You can use lemon juice, you can use whatever you like. Super simple, takes 2 minutes. It's probably one of the easiest things you can make. Fresh greens and more easily digestible than the raw version. And also super juicy.
Yes. Once again, Joe, I don't see anything on there with a face.
No, we're sticking to the extremist vegetarian situation.
You're racist.
He could make a face out of the vegetables.
You could, yes.
I'll draw something next time.
I mean,
I'll bring some kind of phallic vegetable next week.
Well,
that's always appreciated, Joe.
That went south, literally. From phallic. Jesus.
For supper, you'll serve some greens. Some grains with this. So won't you? Rice or something?
Yeah. So we'll do some kind of starch on the side. Rice most likely, or pasta. These are just side dishes or appetizers.
Rice and pea.
But since it's the middle of the night, I don't want to do a full
You don't want
meal
anything
here.
heavy in the middle of the night, do you?
My kids aren't home, so they're usually night owls. So I'll be eating these.
Marvelous.
All right. So I think Dave and PA is up next.
Yeah, just about to say.
From
one
is he around?
From worker to another.
I do have a few extra details if you're interested until
yes,
Dave
sorry,
gets here.
George.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, according to the Associated Press, at the end of 2022, average annual property insurance premiums had risen more than $4,200 a year in Florida, which is triple the national average. About 12% of homeowners in the state didn't have property insurance, compared with a national average of 5%. According to the Insurance Information Institute, a research organization funded by the insurance industry. At least 6 insurers went insolvent in Florida last year. So that's in addition to the 4 that pulled out voluntarily of the state. But 6 just went bankrupt because of the claims there. And here's an extra ironic nugget for you. According to Public Citizen, Farmers Insurance exits Florida due to concerns over increasing risk from severe weather. The insurance industry continues to prop up the fossil fuel industry. Farmers has held significant investments in fossil fuel companies, and its parent company, Zurich, remains a top global insurer of oil and gas. So these insurance companies are insuring that they're losing, one of their markets by ensuring literally an industry that's destroying the planet.
Is this another case of capitalism eating itself?
It really
Well,
is.
it also, John, it also shows which one pays better.
Yes.
Oil
Ooh.
insurance must pay better than
Yes.
flood insurance.
I mean, but homeowners, auto, these are huge markets in the United States.
Well, it's a consumer market rather than a producer market.
Yeah.
One is
Yeah.
more stable than the other.
Yes.
So
Well,
there-
that was tremendous, Jonathan, of the professor type nature. It's over to DPA,
Hello.
the Jesus of the community, the
Please.
holy carpenter himself. How are we getting on, DPA?
Well, if I die tonight, I'll be back in 3 days. How does that sound?
There we go.
Now that's an
Anyway.
insurance policy.
And then for another 2,000, yeah.
Get out of hell free card.
So
So
what?
this is a Stanley number 80. It
Ooh,
says so right there.
yes.
Stanley number 80. 80's in there. Anyway, all this basically is a piece of hardened steel with a little burr, just a little burr rubbed into it, a sharp edge that's just slightly rolled, so it's like a curl. And then that piece is held at an angle so that you're like scraping, taking a very thin layer of wood off
Yeah.
very cleanly. I mean, you could do the same with a paint scraper, any sharp edge, a knife edge and scrape. But because of that little hook, it cuts it cleaner than like a rough scraper would. And so I glued up these are drawer fronts. This is actually 2 drawer fronts. It'll be split in the center, but it's large drawers going on those drawers over there. Nice and big. Anyway, this is a Pennsylvania cherry, a little figure in it. And I glued them up. So there's a little bit of glue trace here. There's a little place where it's not quite flush. And so I use this to flatten it out prior to sanding. It's a tool that's goes back centuries, basically. And this sort of style, this model, probably 1880s, probably 1870s. And they're still made today. They're still useful, still irreplaceable. Yeah, and it's a real workout to use it because you're pushing.
Yeah.
It's a constant push-up, as you'll see. So I'll readjust the camera for an action shot. And then you can carry on with whatever nonsense you guys have been doing. I haven't.
What form of disco music do you listen to when you're pumping that thing up and down the wood?
Oh,
5, 6, 7. What?
I'm probably just as likely to listen to the Fugees, Wu-Tang Clan, House of Pain, Public Enemy.
Yeah, disco would be too distracting, wouldn't it? You'd be dancing around and that like an idiot.
Yeah, and it triggers me my early childhood and stuff. So I don't want to do that.
Yes. Right. Right. We'll come back to you later, DPA, but we'll keep an eye. I don't know which one, that one or that one. And new scope. Annika is here. She's going to discuss I think you're going to discuss the how to project the positivity of socialism to people who don't really understand it. Yes.
Yes. Hang on. All right. Host is
How are
asking
you?
me to start my video. I do have a video intro to illustrate some of the issues with misconceptions we have with socialism. Never done it this way before.
How long is the video?
Screen share. All righty, here we go.
How long is it?
Good question. How long do I have? Because I gotta, well,
You got
I'm
plenty of
thorough.
time. It's
I have plenty of time.
plenty
Well,
of time. Yeah.
Okay,
What would you consider plenty of time, Annika? That's the best thing.
like half an hour.
Half an hour? Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I'll have to read a little fast, but yeah,
Yeah.
I can do that.
Let's rock. But firstly, though, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. Yeah, definitely wasn't prepared to talk about myself, which for once, but Anyway, so I made this, and some other compilations.
Do you think Joe Biden is a socialist?
Yes.
How would you define socialism?
I define socialism when you bring down your own country, your own race, because he's not black.
The people cannot control anything under socialism. You're a fucking moron. Socialism. The people were God.
They control the means of production. Right?
What did you say socialism was?
When the workers control the means of production.
Yeah, that's
right.
what it is.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
So you're in favor of socialism?
I'm just
I
saying
didn't-
he's correct.
He's
got the definition right.
Do you see Joe Biden as socialist?
The people that are handling him are socialists, yes.
So, yeah, you get the idea. So when I was in high school, we read the Communist Manifesto as part of AP English, and they kept it extremely apolitical. We analyzed the writing, and that was that. And I regret not raising my hand to voice what I was thinking back then, which was, why is this ideology so condemned? It seems, at the very least, to be well-intended and humanitarian. I don't think I would have received a helpful answer, perhaps something along the lines of, oh, it just doesn't work. But it may have shown me at an earlier age that it's worthwhile to investigate that which is demonized, especially if it's unclear why things are demonized. The fact that ideologies influenced by Marxism are misunderstood is by design, and it's not just because of the authoritarian empires that used Marx's name to oppress and citizens and murder political dissidents. It's also because power structures are threatened by collectivism and the power of the people. So, what do people like me believe, and what kind of society do we want? Well, we're going to have to go through a couple of different ideologies, which all differ and all potentially encompass their own sort of subgenre of ideologies. But collectivism is not a new concept. There's a lot of historical examples dating back to antiquity, a lot of philosophizing of utopian societies. I think the Bible is a fun example on account of sort of the irony of the bond between a lot of Christians and the right wing. There's also seemingly a perception nowadays that Jesus was a capitalist, and I'm not sure how they get that from scripture with such passages as, now all who believed were together and all had things in common and sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all as anyone had need. Acts 2:44-45. And blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you for the Son of Man's sake, for indeed your reward is great in heaven. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full, for you shall hunger. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. Luke 6:20-26. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out on the grain, and the laborer deserves his wages. Timothy 5:18. There's a lot more. I'll give more examples in the YouTube video that I ultimately make of this. So there's a couple of important terms that I should go over before I really get into the different ideologies that are important to understand. So first concept is collective ownership, which is a quintessential feature of Marxism, and it's The idea of collective ownership replacing private ownership, private property not being synonymous with personal property. It can mean a few things in a few different systems. It can mean state-owned, community-owned, worker-owned, publicly or cooperatively owned. And these are all ways that businesses can be the domain of the workers instead of an exploitive autocrat whose position is to profit off those laborers. And the concept of a people's government. Now, how would this work? Wouldn't people just be at the whim of a government that owns these essential services? When does collective ownership simply become an autocratic ownership? Well, this has to do with the presence of certain policies, the types of policies that are supported by today's progressives, such as keeping money out of politics, ensuring free and fair elections where voting is made accessible to everyone, open government and public oversight. These are all policies that keep lawmakers beholden to their constituents and prevent the kind of oligarchic ruling class that we currently struggle with in the United States. Free association. It's a relationship among people within a society that has no state, no class, hierarchy, or private ownership of the means of production. Having access to essential goods theoretically allows people to freely associate and live the lives of their choosing without constraint. So goes the famous passage from the manifesto, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. So on to the ideologies. So Marxism is more of a philosophy and a theory than ideology. As you probably know, it's focused on class strife, exploitation, the immiseration of the proletariat, which is believed to inevitably lead to a revolution. The rights of the worker are ultimately irreconcilable with capitalism, which forces people to become instruments of labor. The post-revolution society posited by Marx involves the collective ownership of the means of production and the elimination of privately owned property. Marx chose the term communism as opposed to socialism due to a perception that socialism was more of a bourgeoisie movement, while communism was more concerned with the working class. A Marxist society would be both classless and stateless, ultimately. He had really specific visions for the progression of technology and how that would eventually make life easier for everyone. A post-revolution Marxist state would gradually evolve from a socialist state to a communist state, the first being an era that would lead to more automation and thus reducing the amount of labor people would need to take on later. So on to communism. It's otherwise known as orthodox socialism. It's an outright rejection of private ownership. There's no for-profit business, and the means of production are owned by the people, or potentially a government that represents the interest of the people, or like a trade syndicate representing the people. It's difficult to explain how it would work because we've never really seen communism. The closest type of government that we've seen is probably anarcho-syndicalism, which has different origins, but it's a very similar idea of working class empowerment and abolishment of capitalism and private property with collective ownership of the means of production, and societies that operate via a bottom-up self-government of workers represented by trade union syndicates. What we have seen is Marxist-Leninism in places like USSR, Cuba, North Korea, and whatnot. And this is a separate ideology that I will explain now. So Marxist-Leninism and how icons of communism weren't really communist. Marxist-Leninism, it has Marx's name, but it's highly revisionist. It was developed by Stalin and is strongly associated with Bolshevism, which is also fairly revisionist. It rejects social democracy and anarchism. It also rejects fascism and imperialism, but political opposition is quashed. In theory, It's supposed to be a dictatorship of the proletariat in which they are represented by a one-party vanguard. Now, in Marxism, this means a dictatorship in which the proletariat holds state power, but in Marxist-Leninist practice, it just ends up literally meaning a dictatorship over the proletariat. Strongly associated with Bolshevism, there was a belief that the revolution would require force and violence. Private property was seized, all the while the party was not acting with majority support of the people. Social Democrats were critical. There was a perception that the Bolsheviks were naive, impulsive, and had set out to construct a state that was only partially resembled that which they had planned. So Stalin notoriously believed that a 5-year plan was necessary for the transition into communism, and that's what justified it. And the resultant formula for Marxist-Leninism involved a development of 5-year plans, rapid industrialization, political centralization, and repression. Other so-called Marxist-inspired revolutions are similarly classified as Marxist-Leninist, followed in China, Vietnam, Cuba, Eastern blocs, what have you. It's also considered right-wing communism or simply authoritarian Marxism. It's criticized as not a true embodiment of communism, as it does not give power to the people through representation, collective ownership, or indeed anything. The only real Marxist aspect is the nationalization of the means of production, but it lacks the essential feature of a proletariat that has political control over the means of production as well as the goods that are produced from them. So socialism. Socialism has a few philosophical origins, one of which is Marxism, but also the democratic ideas of the Enlightenment that are also the inspiration for today's progressivism. It's a political philosophy that encompasses many ideologies. So defining a country as socialist versus having policies that are socialist is not an exact science. Common Sense author Thomas Paine was an advocate for socialist policies. In particular, he detailed a plan to tax property owners to pay for the needs of the poor in his pamphlet Agrarian Justice in 1797. Thomas Spence, a similar thinker and pamphleteer, was even more distinctly socialist, as he detailed in self-published pamphlets such as Property and Land, Everyone's Right in 1775, and The Meridian Sun in 1796. He called for common ownership of land, a democratic and decentralized government, as well as welfare programs, in particular those that were meant to aid mothers and children. So the Soviet Union and states with the same Marxist-Leninist model have been regarded, mistakenly as representations of socialism. But as I said, they've been criticized by socialists and Marxists alike for their absolute lack of democracy. So the French Revolution had socialist influences. A lot of the humanist philosophers at the time were in France. It was the subject of a lot of philosophizing. There were a lot of subgenres. For a while, socialist political parties began to form in Europe after the French Revolution, inspiring the formation of the Labour Party in Britain, for instance. It lended fervor to the formation and strength of workers' groups and unions such as First International in the UK. One such result of this renewed support for workers' rights was the formation of trade unions during the Industrial Revolution. So democratic socialism. Present-day democratic socialism is inspired in part by Nordic socialism and the success of socialist institutions in Western Europe. It dates back to the 19th century, but it's become a popular movement recently, in part as a result of Bernie Sanders, the most recent pink wave in Latin America. Bernie Sanders's open belief in democratic socialism, together with his pro-worker policies, gave many people the feeling that it was okay to be socialist, whereas before it seemed like it wasn't really an option. The criticism of Obama's supposed and very well hidden secret socialism was an example of the sort of messaging that made socialism feel forbidden. Democratic socialism envisions sort of a marriage of a socially owned economy and a democratic government. The economic vision ranges from a more widespread system where businesses or the means of production are collectively owned to more mixed economies where essential services are collectively owned, but other businesses exist in a regulated semi-capitalist economy that looks out for economic democracy and workers' self-management. The means of production to most democratic socialists would be collectively owned in the form of nationalization. A government that has equal access to voting, the prohibition of super PACs and billionaire money in politics that maintains transparency and accountability is likely to represent the people's interests and provide essential services, social safety nets, and regulate private businesses to ensure fair competition, prevent the exploitation of workers, and look out for the interests of marginalized people. So similar ideology is social democracy, which is very similar to visions held by moderate democratic socialists. You have a mixed economy where essential services are nationalized and where there are regulatory measures meant to ensure fair competition, as well as the protection of workers' rights. The government has more programs providing security and essential services for the people, and these programs are more robust than those we currently have in the United States. Countries that operate as social democracies tend to have higher taxes, but they are used to fund programs like the NHS, tuition-free universities, what have you. When you compare the burden of taxes in a social democracy to the cost of private insurance, university grad school, and the medical bills that add up when inevitably you end up with a serious long-term illness. Particularly if you end up getting kicked off your insurance as a result of that illness, I would say higher taxes are a fair price to pay for the security you get. So the talking point that socialism has never worked really isn't true. And I'd like to give a couple of examples. I suppose it's true that, there are no examples of ideologically pure socialism or communism working, but the same can be said for capitalism or any single party ideology. Single party governments tend not to fare very well. One party rule is never a good thing. It's also very undemocratic. So a lot of the examples I'm presenting here are more in the social democratic category. They have mostly mixed economies and governments with primary socialist institutions that provide robust tax-funded programs that provide essential services. So Nordic socialism, and I'd like to focus on Finland in this particular example. According to the World Happiness Index, Finland has been the world's happiest country for 6 consecutive years. The data is taken predominantly from Gallup polls. It's followed by Denmark, Iceland, Israel. Guessing they didn't ask a lot of Palestinians. The Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland. The United States is number 15, and frankly, I'm surprised that it was actually that high. So what Nordic countries have in common, according to the research, is that they all score very highly on the same measures The report uses to explain its findings, such as healthy life expectancy, GDP per capita, social support, low corruption, generosity in a community where people look after one another, and freedom to make key life decisions. So Finland, for example, has the world's broadest social security program and its most sophisticated welfare program. They have a Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, which manages 5 departments of social programs: social insurance, social welfare, healthcare, temperance and alcohol policy, and labor. They have a broad program of unemployment insurance that guarantees a safety net in the event of old age, illness, pregnancy, unemployment, or work-related injuries, as well as a program that's more welfare-oriented to help the disabled, children and mothers, as well as survivors of war and their families. There's a national pension plan in addition to employee pension plans, unemployment insurance, sickness insurance, and workers' comp. Among other services, they provide a robust housing program for those in need, universal daycare, services for the disabled, services for substance abusers. Finland has taken a lot of action to change the more popular view of alcohol as sort of an end-of-day pastime to more of a special occasion activity in order to reduce what was previously a higher rate of alcoholism, which has been very successful. The Primary Healthcare Act of 1972 was the inception of a program intended to offer fully socialized healthcare to every Finnish citizen, regardless of income or social status. While other Nordic countries actually took the lead on healthcare, Finland made a great effort to catch up, and by the 1980s had the world's lowest mortality rate. So next example is revolutionary Catalonia. So between July 21st, 1936 and May 8th, 1937, the autonomous region of Catalonia was controlled by various leftist parties that were socialist, communist, anarchist, as well as trade unions that were of similar mind. Nominally, there was a general in power, but the trade unions had de facto control over the economy and military. This began with the Spanish Civil War, and socialist leadership led to collective farming, as well as workers' control of business and factories. Ideologically, the People's Government drew from anarcho-syndicalist as well as anarcho-communist influences, which I think is probably fairly close to real Marxism. Historically, it's the largest territory ever to have been governed in this fashion. Workers controlled businesses that including railways, streetcars, buses, taxis, shipping, electricity and power companies, gas, waterworks, engineering, and automobile assembly plants, mines, factories, food processing, newspapers, bars, hotels, department stores, as well as property. The products of many industries were collectivized, although judging by historical accounts, there weren't a lot of options given to those who preferred to opt out, and that's not what we want. Albert Perez Baró of the Confederación Nacional de Trabajo gave the following account of how workplaces without management were restored to order. After the first few days of euphoria, the workers returned to work and found themselves without responsible management. This resulted in the creation of workers' communities and factories, workshops and warehouses, which tried to resume production with all the problems that a transformation of this kind entailed. Owing to inadequate training and the sabotage of some of the technicians who remained, many others had fled, with the owners, the workers' committees, and other bodies that were improvised had to rely on the guidance of unions. Lacking training in economic matters, the union leaders with more goodwill than success, began to issue directives that spread confusion in the factory committees and enormous chaos in production. This was aggravated by the fact that each union gave different, not and often contradictory instruction. So that was taken from the Spanish Civil War, Revolution and Counter-Revolution by Burnett Balotin. So that's how things started out, but they actually ended up getting things under control. So unfortunately, we can't know how this government would have fared over time because it was destroyed by nationalist forces in 1939. So the next example I'd like to give is Lula's Brazil. So Latin America has experienced what's been referred to as a pink tide in recent years, and arguably this hasn't ended, although there have been right-wing backlashes that have been very extreme on political and civilian levels. The current leftist governments that the U.S. hasn't deposed yet are members of the Sao Paulo Forum. They self-identify as post-neoliberal or 21st century socialism. They've rejected the capitalist promoting Washington consensus. And this began with Mexico, Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Honduras, Chile, Colombia, Brazil. Rising prices of commodities have funded welfare programs and lifted people out of poverty. And it has caused an extreme right-wing backlash, which is partially what led to the election of Jair Bolsonaro, after the popular Lula da Silva was imprisoned and later released with charges annulled. Da Silva was released in time to partake in the next election, in which he prevailed over Bolsonaro. So Da Silva served an initial 2 terms from 2003 to 2010. He's currently serving a 3rd term, and he's the first Brazilian president ever to do so. Lula da Silva has been regarded as possibly one of the most popular politicians in the world. He's very comparable to Bernie Sanders in a lot of ways. He was initially elected as Brazil's 35th president, representing the Workers' Party. He took Brazil off the UN's hunger map with his very effective consolidation of social welfare programs, the largest being Bolsa Familia, or family allowance. 20 million Brazilians were lifted out of poverty during his first term. During his first 2 terms, average income and minimum wage increased. There was expanded access to education and healthcare. The GDP experienced growth, and there was a marked decrease in both inflation and public debt. When he assumed office, his first priority was eradicating hunger and implementing a variety of proposed social welfare programs. I mean, imagine an American president making those things their first priority. Besides the aforementioned reforms, he launched a robust housing program in which 40 billion euros were invested. Billions more were invested into urbanizing the favelas, water purification, and relocating the poor from regions that were prone to flooding and landslides. So the circumstances of his now annulled convictions for money laundering and corruption were kind of sus, to put it lightly. The judge presiding over his case ended up becoming Bolsonaro's Minister of Justice and Public Security, Sergio Moro. Brazil's Supreme Court ultimately ruled in 2021 that the charges were biased, and every case brought against him was overturned and his 9-year prison sentence was vacated. Had it not been for this, he would not legally have been able to run for another term in 2022. So his defeat of Bolsonaro would mark the first Brazilian election in which an incumbent was defeated. He has been criticized by members of his party for not being aggressive enough with his implementation of social programs, as well as what some perceive to be alliances with traditional, more oligarchic former presidents. Nonetheless, the result of his policies, both social and economic, as well as the popularity that it's earned him, really serve as a very strong example of socialism working successfully within a democracy. Now, there's a lot of socialism that might have been, and it's probably not a coincidence that a lot of it has been quashed, but I wanted to give some examples of socialist leadership that was never really given a proper chance. One example is the Paris Commune, which is a government that briefly ruled Paris until it was destroyed by military force after a few weeks. It was headed by a communal council that included skilled workers as well as professionals who intended to organize the new society with a federation of delegates who would be mandated by electors to work on behalf of the people. A lot of workplaces were reopened as cooperatives during the very brief lifespan of the Paris Commune. Catalonia, as I previously mentioned, it showed a lot of promise, but it did not last very long. A budding anarcho-communist state that, against the odds, was able to self-govern and have collectivist businesses, and was just destroyed after a couple of years by military forces. And this wasn't just merely a socialist institution. It had roots that were anarchic and Marxist, a very different kind of government than, any of us are accustomed to. Syndicates of trade unions successfully managed the region during its brief life, which demonstrated that during the right circumstances, with the right tactics, such a thing can be done. So then there's regime change in Latin America, with which the United States has played a small part. So beginning with the Truman Doctrine and intensifying with the Cold War, the U.S. has a historical pattern of deposing democratically elected left-wing leaders in Latin America, and replacing them with right-wing leaders. And it consistently serves to benefit U.S. economic interests. So, for example, Isabella Perón in Argentina, Juan Jose Torres in Bolivia, Juan Bosch of the Dominican Republic, and Arbenz of Guatemala were all democratically elected leaders who were pro-working class and in favor of implementing and strengthening social programs. They were all overthrown in coups that were backed by the U.S. With military aid and often the involvement of the CIA. The exact same occurred with Salvador Allende of Chile, and what followed was the dictatorship of Pinochet, which was backed by the United States. The CIA famously attempted to assassinate Fidel Castro over 630 times, although I'm not including Castro as an example of a good socialist leader on account of the lack of democracy in his regime. The U.S. also quashed rebellions and potential opposition leaders such as Augusto Sandino, who was assassinated. His supporters, the Sandinistas, were the ones who ultimately overthrew the 40-year Somoza dictatorship. But with their political leader gone, the revolutionaries ended up effectively replacing what was already a broken government for a number of years, which had some successes in areas like promoting literacy, but were also criticized for some alleged violence. It's not clear how many of these accusations are true. Some of this came from the Reagan administration, some of it came from the Heritage Foundation, but some of it also came from the Anti-Defamation League. So that this is a matter for another research project. They were ultimately overthrown by the US-backed Contras, who committed acts of terrorism, and a variety of human rights abuses, including the murder of healthcare workers, the torture of civilians, widespread rape, and seizing civilian property. So in conclusion, socialist policies are consistently very popular among working Americans of all backgrounds. Though this isn't the majority, there were a lot of Trump supporters who were initially in favor of Bernie Sanders. The policies themselves are popular, but the label scares people, and it causes them to vote against their own interests. Nonetheless, progressive and democratic socialist candidates are a threat to establishment Democrats, enough so that the establishment will sometimes spend as much money against, our candidates than they do against Republican candidates. People are tired of corrupt, out of touch, oligarchic politicians, and that's something that a lot of us have in common. Some people, unfortunately, are more drawn to more of the grifter component. It's possible that maybe they identify with something they see in Joe Rogan, or maybe they followed Tim Pool when he covered Occupy Wall Street, and they don't follow enough of a variety of figures to really see the other sides of the argument and how biased he is now. But people are more likely to be open to new information when it's coming from a friend. So if we want a better country, it's really important to be that friend.
Are you saying be more of an arm around the shoulder than a scone?
Than a scone or a scorn?
Scone. It's me accent, Annika. Scorn, SCORN. Like a
Definitely. And I think the left, that's such a broad term, has a reputation for being very scornful, and that it could be that it's just some assholes on Twitter that are largely responsible for that reputation. But we do need some better PR in that department. And yeah, it is important to be an arm around the shoulder. Like if you have a friend who has a good heart but just doesn't have very good judgment in who they believe to deliver the facts. I talk about this a lot. Yeah. It's worth, meeting them halfway and, trying to walk them in the right direction.
You could put an arm over the shoulder and give them a scone.
Yes. I mean, scones are pretty awesome. So
scone, no, that should be our hashtag. Scone, not scorn.
Maybe more politicians or progressive candidates could hand out scones at rallies. That would at least get people to show up. And people will definitely show up for scones.
Yes. So, rumor has it you have plans to do a sort of podcast based around these themes. Is that a thing?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that it would be more of a YouTube channel, and that I would basically do it through this podcast. So that's the plan so far. I did a lot of work on it today. So yeah, more to come.
Marvel and indeed us. Right, we're going to go back with the DBA very briefly to see how he's getting on with his wood. Are you getting on good with your wood, DBA?
Yeah, I'm moving right along. Mainly doing the backs first, and then I'll sharpen to do the fronts. But yeah, this is the last one. Thanks for asking.
Yeah,
Didn't know you cared so much.
I'm very intrigued about your wood and its qualities. The qualities for DBA's wood. That's all I'm bothered about, man.
Boy, talk about going south.
I've got off on one, man. I'm all over the place. I made the mistake of going to bed early so I could be fresh for this, and now my brain's jumping all over the place. So what else have you to do with that wood for it to be finished?
Oh, we'll sand it. Cut it to size, of course.
Marvelous.
Yeah, it's just a drawer front. So.
Oh, and as ever, as ever, the most important question: how does it smell? Take your time. Take your time.
Yeah, it's got a smell, but it's hard to distinguish. It's not a very distinctive smell, although I know it when I smell it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? It's not something I could describe the way, like if it was white oak, I could say it smells like bourbon, of course.
You need to be a wood smell familiar, sommelier even. Oh,
I guess.
Marvelous.
I guess I have 57 varieties of sawdust in my lungs, so yeah.
It's better than coldest. Marvelous.
Yeah. Yep.
Cheese deep here.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks,
Tremendous. Well, I don't know if anybody in the community here has anything coming up this week, and I think we're due. I'd like someone to do a rundown of the week ahead schedule because we have a lot of things going on in this community. Not enough, but that'll increase.
It's a little early in the week.
Yeah. So what? What did you say?
Say that again.
What did you say? You said something about a week.
It's a little bit early in the week for seeing what's happening next week. We do have booking 1 month in advance, so you can take your time, formulate an idea, and think about what kind of presentation you want to give. And you can book an hour spot. If you need to, you can do that as well.
Right.
And yep.
Okay. Well, just a moment here because things have gone a bit south. Because someone just turned up. No, I was expecting not to turn up. Just a moment. Does anybody have any elevator music? While I type this to somebody in the chat. Thank you. You keep on doing that, long thing. For those of you on the YouTube who keep seeing me do that, because I'm using my phone and I've got in order to use the chat on Zoom, it's always in portrait and not. Oh, first world problems. Hold on. So just a moment here. Well, I'm guessing because I'd written the rushes off. To be frank, because one of the rushes wasn't attending. I'd like to know if that rush is intending to do a rush.
What?
Oh, marvelous. That's good. Well, for what it's worth, we have a pundit on the Autonomous Collective, and it's 2 people, and it's the same person, and from hell, and it's Rush.
But I'm the real Rush Limbaugh from hell.
Oh, I see. My rival has returned.
Yes, your rival is here, and he's not going anywhere.
No.
Because
you don't
I'm
understand.
stuck.
You've been taken over by the feminazi mind virus.
Sorry, that was me.
How dare you? How dare you even suggest that? I was barely able to suffer through that previous socialism explanation without decrying the utter lack of understanding of the true nature of capitalism and its superior qualities and how it will always crush socialism and, God forbid, communism. Though I have to say there are a surprising lack of socialists and communists down here in hell. I thought they'd all be here. I'm not exactly sure where they are.
You must be in the low rent part of hell.
I think, no, I'm at the radio station here at the top of a hill overlooking the lower circles of hell, not anywhere near the boiling rivers of blood, though I do broadcast to them.
I say it's time we bury the hatchet and kill Christopher Hitchens.
Good evening.
God forbid.
Good evening, comrades, sisters, brothers.
Oh, good Lord.
Sons,
No, it could not be.
Mothers, uncles, small mammals, and vermin.
Will his bloviating never end?
I find it quite ironic that of all the people to end up in hell, it's you and the other you. Equally ironic, I find the fact that I've ended up in heaven. So who's laughing now, fatso? Yes.
I'm utterly appalled. How did you even find us down here?
I could smell you from a mile. And a mile in heaven is a long
It smells like a humidor to me, which is a fine scent indeed.
Yes, we prefer the smell of cigars and brimstone, and you, sir, smell of fermented vegetarian greenery that I wouldn't dare consume.
A touch of the grape, as it were. You lousy lush.
I think you'll find at a whim, at any moment when I can come up with any smell I desire. That's the fun about heaven. Whereas you, down in the old smoke rooms, that's all you're going to be smelling of. Sulfur, the stench of death.
Well, then, look, I think we could find some common ground here, Chris. What do you think
We
about
can
that
find
Iraq
common ground.
war?
I've been intrigued. I always thought I'd end up down there. What is the place like?
Well, here in hell, it's much like Iraq, which you supported the bombing of.
Yes,
it's similar to a particularly bad day in Fallujah, with the smell of burning bodies and the smell of burning oil fields. I actually quite like it.
Well, if I'd have done more to get into hell and hear my own voice come back at me twice, I'd have done a lot more to fight for the cause against drug. I don't know how I got in up here.
I don't quite know how you got in there either. I think there was a bit of dirty dealing going on.
I think it's more God's ineffable laugh at the universe. I find it interesting also that for some reason he's not around. You make it to heaven and he's not around. Just does not want to be bothered, which I think is part of the point.
Well, if I understand correctly, you don't exactly believe in him, do you?
I have no option anymore. That's the killer, which is sort of makes this my hell.
Well, isn't that utterly ironic? You could certainly join us down here where you wouldn't have to worry about whether God, so you see, is amongst us or not. You would be much happier down here with our good friend Beelzebub.
I do find it interesting, to say the least, that you find yourself very much at home in the old dark place. So I think I'll leave you to it. There's still a lot to explore up here. A lot of things.
I will admit, with the heat, the stench, the humidity, it does somewhat remind me of Palm Beach and my estate, not too far from Mar-a-Lago. And yes, I will admit that I am rather comfortable with the general atmosphere.
Well, from what I gather in earlier this evening of the conversation on this strange presentation suggests that Florida will very soon be as hot as hell. So there's the similarity. I've got one question more than anything. I've been pondering this because I've not seen this turgid excuse of a human up here. Is Billy Graham down there?
Of course not. He should. He's up there with you. I believe.
Oh, once again, God's ineffable little game has. He's not here. I can assure you, I would know if he were here.
Are you absolutely sure?
Yes.
I don't believe I've seen him down here. Have you,
I
Rush?
I could smell him a mile off this year. Yeah. Well, it's been lovely. I don't know why I was sent here on this mission from a man I've not met yet. Also without any sort of mission. I'm just punted here. I think.
Well,
I don't know what to say.
perhaps it was giving you a little bit of taste of where you might eventually end up if you become one of those fallen angels who have since descended down from the great above, down here among us where they belong.
It has to be said, God in his own mysteriously moving way has afforded me a new position on the notion of hell. I, for a while, was quite partial to saying I wouldn't mind going to hell with all the good music and the drugs and the sex, but seemingly heaven is what you make it. So I get all that up here. So you can stick with the fires down there, and I'll stick with the clouds. Thank you.
Very well. I think that is a fair exchange. And oh wait, just a moment. Hello? Oh my God. It is Billy Graham. What are you doing down here?
Did he answer?
Well, Rush, I said that I don't know what I'm doing down here, but I thought the pearly gates certainly didn't look like the pearly gates to me. Are we in heaven? It seems very hot for heaven. Well, Mr. Hitchens, I'm going to have to get back to you. We seem to have a bit of confusion down here. I don't understand why Mr. Graham ended up in the wrong place. I'm sure it was a mistake. I will reach out to the authorities down here and make sure he ends up back up there where he belongs.
Well, before we part, Double Rush, if I can call you that, can we make a pact that no matter what happens with Henry Kissinger, he doesn't come up here?
Well, I've had a change of heart about him over the years, and while I do admire a war criminal, and while I do admire all the great things he did in Vietnam to save democracy and keep us from communism, if the price were right, I could persuade certain people to make sure that he doesn't end up at the pearly gates, shall we say.
It might be a default anyway. I seem to notice that it's mainly atheists and communists up here. So make of that what you will. Anyway, I'd like to say it was a pleasure speaking to you, but it, of course, wasn't, and it will never be.
Well, and it was a miserable time talking to you too, but perhaps we could be forced to do this again sometime.
Yes, thank you. I hope every one of your spawn is killed in a freak yachting accident.
And I hope that your appendages fall off, and that You never influence any other people politically, socially, or God forbid, spiritually.
Fine by me. I've got my Johnny Walker Black.
Hey, that's my Johnny Walker Black. What are you doing with it?
No, you put down the phone.
All right.
What? What the hell happened
Goodbye
there?
from hell.
What happened there? My phone was overtaken. Went off. I could smell some strange funky smell coming out of my phone. Don't know what the hell all that was about. Anyway. I think that's it. Because we were due Ken Mann, the lovely Ken Mann, who not everybody in our community's met. But you love him when you meet him. He's got a very immense beard. And he's an American dude living in Scotland, not far from me. And he sings show tunes. And we can't decide whether it's a closet or a cupboard. Closet sounds funny.
I don't believe it's a water closet.
It's not a water closet. No. Thankfully, you can. It's not like a set of drawers. That'll be hilarious, just curled up in there. Anyway, does anybody else have anything they wish to declare before we end this bloody insane meeting? No? Oh, look at this. Look at this. Amazing. Look at that. Slick. Slick. Effortless.
Great show. Thanks, Lane.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye to all. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.